Do you ever get the impression that Jesus was this very serious-minded person who never laughed and never worried or got mad? Well, the Gospels help us see Jesus as a real person. He had friends. He had people that he loved and enjoyed spending time with. Yes, he was focused on his preaching and ultimately dying on the cross. But he was a person with his own personality. There's a book that I enjoyed reading as part of my research for Amazed by Jesus. It's called The Dawn of Christianity by Robert Hutchinson. Listen to this interpretive account of Jesus' presentation of the Sermon on the Mount. On this particular autumn day, Jesus sat on the hillside. Large groups of people were making their way to the area from many different villages in the region. Jesus would speak here often on the hillside covered with dazzling poppies and bright yellow daisies. On this day, the crowds were only a few hundred, perhaps 1,000. The crowd was laughing because Jesus had said something funny, which he often did. I love that. So what was so funny in the Sermon on the Mount? Just one of many instances of humor was Jesus' illustration of someone having a big, humongous log in their eye, and they're trying to remove a tiny speck in someone else's eye. Let me tell you, that's funny. One of my favorite gospel accounts is in Mark 3. The Pharisees are testing Jesus by bringing in upon a disabled man with a withered hand. And I'll never forget the words from Mark 3, verse 5. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. And then he motioned for the man. He told the man to come forward. Stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And then notice what verse 6 says. In response to Jesus' miracle, this is what the Pharisees did. They went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Talk about a volatile response. No wonder Jesus was so angry with these so-called religious leaders. One time, a man came to Jesus, full of leprosy, this man was, and he begged Jesus to heal him. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus, moved with pity, said, I am willing. Be cleansed. That's Mark 1, verses 40 and 41. Jesus was so compassionate. He was an eloquent speaker. We know this because of how mesmerized the crowds were at his preaching. For example, when he went to his hometown of Nazareth in Galilee, we're told that the Nazarenes in the synagogue that day marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. Have you ever been in a tense situation that needed diffusing? When Jesus was approached by the Pharisees very late in his ministry, they intended to trip him up and embarrass him and get him in trouble. They asked him, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Here's how Jesus responded in Matthew 22, verse 18. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. You know what he did? He diffused the situation. But more than that, he amazed the people with his clever response. Notice the reaction of the people in verse 22. When they heard it, they marveled. When Jesus was in a boat with his disciples in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, a storm hit them out of nowhere, and the disciples were panicking. Do you remember what Jesus was doing? Well, they were panicking, running around. Jesus was asleep, his head on a cushion. And do you know why? Well, for one thing, he was tired. He'd been teaching a lot, and that's why, but also because he had such strong faith and knew all was going to be well. In fact, Luke 8, verse 25 tells us that after Jesus stilled the storm and everyone was safe, he asked his disciples, where is your faith? Here's another one. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, on the night of his betrayal, he prayed to God 3 times, "Let this cup pass from me." This shows us the human side of Jesus. Yes, he had a sense of humor. He could get angry. He was compassionate and loving, but he was human. God in the flesh. He got hungry and tired. Okay. But he also experienced fear. He dreaded the pain and suffering he was about to suffer on the cross. And who wouldn't? But you, of course, remember his response. "Not my will, but yours be done." Despising the shame, Jesus died on the cross for you and me. Okay, here's one more. The omnipotent Son of God, the Almighty incarnate, said this of himself, "I am meek and lowly in heart." Matthew 11, verse 29. Jesus loved people. He loved children. Do you remember that? He hated sin and human pride, but he loved helping people. All right, we better stop. As you read the Gospels and survey the life of Christ, try to think about what it would be like to see Jesus as a friend, to hang out with him, and see him dazzle the crowd with his words. And remember this, one day you'll meet him and get to spend eternity with him. I can't wait to meet him. And I'm so glad that we have the Gospels to give us a glimpse of who he was and what he was like.